What would you choose? A leader who tells you sweet words, or someone who dares to speak the painful truth? The illusion of leadership. There is a question that seems simple but has haunted philosophy and politics for centuries. What do we truly want in a leader? Raw truth or sweet lies? If we answer rationally, most of us would say, I want the truth. But if we look back at how society operates, we see a sad paradox. People are often drawn to, even deeply attached to, those who promise beautiful illusions rather than those who dare to give difficult warnings. Think back to the story of Elizabeth Holmes and the Theranos Empire. Her technology never actually worked, but the vision of a small machine that could change medicine made millions believe. Investors poured in billions. Employees abandoned their careers to join. Patients placed their trust in her, not because of the truth, but because of a dream. When the lies collapsed, it didn't just take money, but destroyed health, trust, and even human lives. This reveals a deep instinct. We crave hope so much that we are willing to close our eyes to the truth. In psychology, this is called confirmation bias. We are more likely to believe what we want to believe than to face what is true. And in politics, in business, in daily life, this tendency always repeats. We choose leaders not because they are right, but because they make us feel comfortable. Yet, Machiavelli, the 16th century Italian thinker, saw through this illusion long ago. He wrote, "Men are ready to believe what they wish to believe rather than the truth." And because of this, those who know how to create illusions often easily gain power, while those who are honest are easily overlooked. The trap of charisma. Let us leave the modern era for a moment and return to the past. In history, countless rulers built their power on the foundation of charisma. They knew how to speak, how to shape an image, how to ignite collective faith. But if we look more closely, most of them often led their country or organization into a dead end. The problem was not that they were incompetent. On the contrary, they were masters of persuasion. But because they wanted to be loved, they often avoided hard truths. They gave out easy promises, implemented policies that pleased the majority, but forgot that the mission of leadership is not to make people feel good, but to help people survive and develop in harsh reality. Nietzsche once said, "Truth is the least popular thing, but the most necessary." A king who only seeks love is like someone obsessed with the mirror, forgetting that behind his back, a fire is burning. The same is true in business. Leaders who are praised for being inspirational are sometimes the very ones who cause hidden chaos. They are good at encouraging, good at stirring emotions, but lack the courage to say, "We are failing. We need to change." And that silence, that smile, is the knife that slowly kills the organization. Crowd psychology and the sweetness of lies. Why are people so easily conquered by seductive lies? Perhaps because we live more by hope than by reason. Hope is like a mental painkiller. It soothes anxiety about the future, making us feel protected. A promise can temporarily fill the void of worry, while a harsh truth confuses us, leaving us disoriented. For example, when a politician says, "I will create millions of jobs. I will lead everyone into an era of prosperity," we applaud, even though deep down, we know no one can guarantee that. Meanwhile, a leader who dares to say, "We will have to sacrifice, we will have to pay a price, there will be hard years ahead," is often seen as pessimistic, lacking appeal. Psychology calls this phenomenon temporal discounting. People prefer immediate rewards over long-term benefits. We want to hear what makes us happy today, even knowing that tomorrow we may pay the price. And skillful storytelling leaders take advantage of this instinct. Machiavelli and the leadership paradox. Machiavelli is considered a devil in political science because he bluntly pointed out a truth no one wanted to hear. If you must choose, it is better to be feared than loved. But feared here does not mean the terror of a tyrant, but respect, caution, when knowing that the leader has enough courage to make difficult decisions, even if no one likes them. It is the kind of fear born from responsibility and competence, not from the whip. A leader too obsessed with being loved will soon lose authority. They dare not refuse, dare not say no, dare not cut away what is wrong. And the result is that the entire group sinks into a sweet but deadly illusion. In philosophy, this is called the conflict between sentimental ethics and responsibility ethics. Kant once said, morality is doing what is right regardless of the consequences. But Machiavelli was the opposite. Sometimes the right thing must consider the final outcome, because the purpose of leadership is to preserve the survival of the community, not to maintain a beautiful image in people's eyes. An example from history. Imagine a king in wartime. The enemy army is approaching the border, food is scarce, people are panicked. If that king stood up and said, "We will be fine, everything will be good, just be calm," the people might applaud, reassure each other, feel more secure. But when the enemy invades, that comfort is worthless. On the other hand, if the king dared to say, "We will suffer hunger, we will face loss, but I need everyone to sacrifice and prepare," his words would at first cause panic, even hatred toward him. But it is precisely that hard truth that helps people prepare and sometimes saves the whole country. Machiavelli witnessed such tragedies in his time. Dynasties collapsed not because their rulers were cruel, but because they were too kind, too eager to be loved, and unwilling to face reality. Connecting to the present. Today, we still repeat that circle. CEOs with bright smiles on television, politicians promising a golden age, community leaders painting ideal visions. All of it makes us feel comfortable, but makes us forget the most important question. Is this real? When climate change threatens survival, when the economy faces instability, when technology can reshape the structure of society, then listening to a story that everything will be fine is no different from taking a sleeping pill in a burning house. True leadership, as Machiavelli implied, is not the one who brings the most comfort, but the one who dares to say what most needs to be heard. They do not seek to be loved, but seek to secure the future. The illusion of leadership still clings deeply in our minds. We prefer gentleness over truth, comfort over warning. But history has proven many times, beautiful lies can lull us to sleep, and when we wake, we see only ashes. The nature of power and necessary ruthlessness. In the previous part, we saw why people are often enchanted by pleasant lies, and why Machiavelli, as early as the 16th century, warned that leaders who seek affection will often lead the group to destruction. But what happens if we dare to go against the tide, if a leader dares to give up the desire to be loved? This question leads us to the most famous paradox in political philosophy. Should a leader be loved, or should he be feared? When Machiavelli said, "It is better to be feared," that statement gave Machiavelli the reputation of being the devil of political science. People saw him as one who encouraged violence, scheming, ruthlessness. But if we read more carefully, we will see that he never praised meaningless cruelty. The fear that Machiavelli referred to was not trembling before the whip, but respect, caution before someone you know for certain. He will do what is necessary, even when it causes pain. A leader like that creates a strange sense of security. We fear disappointing him, fear betraying the trust he gives, not because of punishment, but because we know he has the courage to impose discipline. It is precisely that strictness that prevents the community from falling into chaos. That is what Machiavelli called good fear, fear accompanied by respect, completely different from the fear of a tyrant, ruthlessness as a form of compassion. In life, we often confuse kindness with weakness, but kindness does not mean always indulging others' wishes. Sometimes, strictness is the very way to protect them. Imagine a doctor before a cancer patient. He could say, "Don't worry, your illness is mild, a few pills and you'll be fine." The patient would feel comfortable, less anxious, even grateful. But then death would come quickly, without time to prepare, without time to treat. On the other hand, another doctor could say, "You have a serious disease. We will have to operate. It will be very painful. It will take a long time." The patient would be terrified, perhaps angry, perhaps resentful. But it is precisely that harsh truth that opens up the chance of survival. Leadership is the same. Cruelty well used may be called mercy. This is not an excuse for violence, but a reminder that sometimes strictness is the highest form of compassion. Examples from history and modern times. Let us remember Winston Churchill in World War II. When Britain faced the threat of annihilation, many wanted to sign a peace treaty to be safe. That was the easy choice, the lovable choice. But Churchill said, "We will not surrender." He knew that meant bombs, hunger, sacrifice, and indeed, Britain went through bloody years. But it was precisely that ruthless decisiveness that saved European civilization from the hands of fascism. In the business world, when Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, he did something considered ruthless. He fired thousands of employees, canceled countless projects. People cursed him, called him an autocrat, cold-blooded. But thanks to that, Apple not only survived, but became a global symbol of innovation. Jobs' ruthlessness, seen from the long-term outcome, was actually compassion for tens of thousands of future employees and millions of customers. Both Churchill and Jobs illustrate Machiavelli's philosophy. Compassion is not making people happy in the present, but saving them from collapse in the future. The philosophy of responsibility and difficult choices. Here, we see the fundamental difference between two kinds of ethics. Kantian ethics. Right action is action in accordance with rules, regardless of consequences. Machiavellian ethics. Later Weber called this the ethic of responsibility. Right action is action that considers consequences and protects the common good, even if it goes against immediate desires. In leadership, the ethic of responsibility is often more painful because it forces us to do what we do not want, to bear hatred. But that is the essence of power. Not the right to be loved, but the responsibility to carry decisions that no one dares to make. Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote, "Man is condemned to be free." Leaders too, they are condemned to choose, even when every choice brings pain. Avoiding choice may seem merciful, but in fact, it is irresponsible. The psychology of moral courage. Modern studies in psychology show leaders who avoid conflict, who fear offending others, often create long-term instability. Problems are never solved, only hidden. Employees gradually lose trust, productivity declines, while the incompetent are nurtured. On the other hand, leaders who dare to confront directly, dare to make difficult decisions, may at first cause discomfort, but they build a lasting foundation. Psychologists call this moral courage, doing the right thing, even at personal cost. Here we see Machiavelli was not wrong. To be respected is more sustainable than to be loved. The love of the crowd fades quickly, but respect built on responsibility lasts. When kindness turns into crime. There is a bitter paradox. A leader too merciful, always wanting to keep harmony, can become the cause of greater tragedy. Think of a manager who never dares to fire weak employees. He thinks he is being kind, protecting their livelihoods. But the consequence is that the whole team is dragged down. The talented leave, the weak remain, and finally, the company collapses. That kindness turns out to be a crime because it destroys more lives than it saves. Or in politics, a leader too eager to be loved may delay tough decisions, and when crisis strikes, everything collapses in chaos. In reality, that weakness is another form of selfishness. They protect their image instead of protecting the community. From strictness to freedom. What is interesting is, a leader's strictness, when applied rightly, does not deprive people of freedom, but on the contrary, liberates them. A strict coach may force athletes to train to exhaustion. Students hate him, think he is ruthless. But thanks to that, they achieve results. They gain the freedom to stand on the podium of glory. A teacher who dares to give low grades, dares to criticize frankly, may be hated by students, but thanks to that, they mature. They gain freedom in the future. True power, as Machiavelli saw it, is not indulgence, but the courage to impose discipline for long-term benefit. Leadership in today's crisis. We are living in a century full of turbulence. Climate change threatens the survival of humankind. Artificial intelligence technology fundamentally changes the way humans work, learn, and communicate. The gap between rich and poor is widening. Society is divided by fake news and extremism. Amid these whirlwinds, the question of leadership becomes a life or death question. What kind of leadership can help humanity step through times of crisis? If we look around, it is easy to be disappointed. On the political stage, there is no shortage of leaders who prefer to give flowery slogans rather than practical plans. In business, many CEOs are good at speeches, but avoid painful decisions. In civil society, there are not few who lead out of a desire for fame rather than a spirit of responsibility. All this creates a global leadership crisis. We have too many people who want to be loved, but too few who dare to bear hatred to do what is necessary, when systems matter more than individuals. Machiavelli once warned, "A good person in a bad system will also become bad, and a bad person in a good system may be forced to do the right thing." This brings a profound lesson. One cannot place trust only in individual leaders. Even those who begin with noble ideals can become corrupted when power is placed in their hands for too long, unchecked. Remember the famous psychological studies, the Milgram experiment, where ordinary people easily inflicted pain on others just because of orders from an authority figure, or the Stanford prison experiment, where students quickly turned into cruel wardens in just a few days when given power. Power, as Michel Foucault analyzed, does not reside only in the hands of an individual, but permeates the entire social structure. Therefore, the question is not only who leads, but also what system restrains power so it does not become a monster. Lessons from business and politics. In business, corporations collapse not because of a lack of talent, but because the system fosters blindness. CEOs are surrounded by yes men, those who only say pleasant things. Risks are hidden, problems ignored, until crisis explodes. The same is true in politics. A leader may start with good intentions, but when the entire apparatus is built to worship him, when no one dares to oppose, power gradually turns into tyranny. The history of Europe, Asia, and the Americas all record countless such tragedies. Therefore, Machiavellian leadership is not just an individual who dares to be decisive, but also someone who builds a system to restrain himself. The truly wise leader understands that he too can be corrupted, and so he actively establishes mechanisms of control and opposition. The hard truth in the 21st century. Today, humanity faces challenges that Machiavelli perhaps never imagined. Climate change. Politicians know that reducing emissions means sacrificing short-term growth, with tax policies and restrictions that are unpopular. Many choose to promise both growth and environmental protection, a pleasing phrase but nearly impossible. True leaders must dare to admit, to save the planet, we will have to pay a price, change our way of life, abandon familiar comforts. Technology and artificial intelligence. Tech CEOs often say that AI will create a bright future for all. But the truth is, millions of jobs will disappear, and only a small group will benefit first. Responsible leaders must speak clearly about the new inequality, must prepare solutions, not just paint vague visions. Polarized society. In the age of social networks, extreme, simple, and pleasing promises have stronger appeal than complex, uncomfortable truths. True leaders must dare to go against the crowd, dare to explain difficult things, dare to bear criticism instead of catering to the crowd. In all these challenges, we see one common thing. The hard truth is always less popular, but it is the only foundation for survival, philosophy of leadership and responsibility. Hannah Arendt once said, "True power does not lie in violence, but in the ability of people to act together." Leadership, therefore, is not the one who issues orders, but the one who awakens the capacity for coexistence, organization, and cohesion. But to do so, they must dare to make painful decisions, dare to uphold standards even when hated. Sartre's existential philosophy reminds us, freedom is always tied to responsibility. Leaders have the freedom to decide, but along with it comes the responsibility to bear consequences for thousands, millions of people. Ignoring the truth to seek affection is not only cowardly, but also a betrayal of that responsibility. Risk and courage. Another lesson Machiavelli emphasized is the art of risk management. Leaders cannot avoid all risks, for fleeing risk is itself the greatest risk. The question is, which risk to choose, and for what purpose? Jeff Bezos, when building Amazon, accepted seemingly crazy risks many times, reinvesting profits instead of paying dividends, expanding into fields no one believed in. But those were calculated risks, with long-term vision. Conversely, many large companies collapse because they avoided tough decisions, stayed safe in the present, only to be left behind. In politics, a leader who dares to raise taxes to invest in infrastructure may be hated, may lose votes. But that is the necessary risk for the nation's future. Conversely, those who promise to cut taxes and increase welfare at the same time are often only shifting the burden to the next generation. Leadership, therefore, is not avoiding risk, but courageously choosing the right risk. The difference between leaders and manipulators. At this point, there is a thin line: how to distinguish between a leader who dares to make tough decisions and a manipulative dictator. The difference lies in responsibility and transparency. True, leaders say, "This decision is difficult. It may make you hate me, but I take responsibility because I believe it is necessary." Manipulators say, "Trust me, I know what is good for you, and I don't need to explain." One side is based on honesty, dialogue, and responsibility. The other on ambiguity, concealment, and avoidance of consequences. That is why modern democracy emphasizes the role of opposition, of the press, of control mechanisms, not to obstruct leaders, but to keep them within necessary limits, so that necessary ruthlessness does not turn into meaningless dictatorship. Leadership in collaborative communities. You may think, all this is only true for politicians, or big CEOs. But in small environments, research groups, clubs, charities, what then? In fact, the principle remains the same. Even in cooperative environments, where everyone is equal, someone must dare to make the final decision when consensus cannot be reached. The researcher who dares to demand an experiment be repeated despite time cost instead of rushing to publish for praise. The volunteer manager who dares to remove unreliable volunteers, even if it offends. At any scale, leadership requires courage, daring to place long-term results above short-term comfort. The future of leadership. So, in the 21st century, what will Machiavellian leadership, understood in the profound sense, not the tyrannical one, look like? They will be those who do not indulge illusions, but dare to speak bitter truths. Do not seek affection, but seek respect. Do not avoid risk, but choose necessary risk to protect the future. Do not surrender to instinct, but build systems to restrain themselves. Do not promise everything is fine, but point out a difficult yet possible path. Such leaders are neither angels nor demons, but human beings. Humans courageous enough to bear hatred, to face truth, to lead communities through darkness. Machiavelli once wrote, "When choosing between being loved and being feared, choose to be feared, because fear is bound to responsibility more enduringly than fleeting love." He did not encourage us to become monsters. He only wanted to remind that humans are easily seduced by illusions, and leaders cannot chase after such illusions. True leaders are not those who make us comfortable, but those who help us survive, help us grow, help us face truth, even if that truth is painful. In today's world, when every crisis demands tough decisions, we must remember this lesson all the more. Do not quickly believe those who say what we want to hear. Seek those who dare to say what we need to hear, because ultimately, as Machiavelli reminds us, leadership is not to be liked. Leadership is to be useful. And sometimes, cruelty in the present is the greatest compassion for the future. What do you think about Machiavelli's view? Better to be respected than to be loved. Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to continue exploring with me the hard truths of philosophy and life, don't forget to hit follow so you don't miss the next videos.